Today I'm joined by Harman Bhangu, MLA for Langley Abbotsford and BC Conservatives opposition critic for transportation. Harman is a first-generation Canadian, born at Surrey Memorial Hospital to immigrant parents. He dedicated a life of building a life grounded in liberty and opportunity. Before entering politics, he spent 17 years in heavy load trucking and aggregate hauling industry, giving him an off-the-ground insight to infrastructure, logistics, regulatory burden, and how government policy impacts small business. He was elected in 2024 to represent Langley Abbotsford and BC legislator. And as a critic for transportation, he's taken on issues like infrastructure funding, BC ferries, supply chain risks, and provincial contract deals that tie BC's future to foreign interests. In this conversation, we'll dig into the pressing controversies from temporary foreign worker abuse to the BC ferry deals with Beijing and the cancellation of major housing developments in BC. Let's get into it. Harman, thanks for joining us. I want to start with something right off the top. I was looking at your X profile and it says, quote unquote, winning is not a sometime thing. It's an all the time thing. You don't do things right once in a while. You do them right all the time. Look, that's not just a slogan. That's a mindset. So let me ask you this. Why that quote?
I come from a sports background, played football, highly competitive, and just had a great passion for the game and how it came about. And that quote's from Vince Lombardi, one of the great coaches in football. And just having that discipline that I got from football, just every day you got to work hard. There's someone out there that's awake right now while you're sleeping. You want to be that person awake that's working hard, that's pushing the limits and pushing the bar and trying to bring out the best in everyone too at the same time. You need people like that, and that's what I feel like I can do in my own self for the people of Langley Abbotsford and whatever transportation critic, if it's transportation or any critic role. I just want to work, excel, and never stop because I really take this seriously being a public servant.
Looking at your profile, you started with trucking and aggregate hauling. It's a tough industry. Why start there, Harman?
My family, my dad, that's where he came to this country, worked in mills. He did trucking, then he ended up working and saving up, got his own truck, and it was a great industry. And what a lot of people don't realize, it was really diverse back then. There was Italians, Croatians, all sorts. He worked with paving companies, concrete companies. And as a young kid, just growing up in that atmosphere, I felt like he got to work on a lot of cool projects. I'd see sports stadiums and he was working on them. It just kind of really brought out that passion and just the cool things and aspect of it. And that's how I kind of got rooted in getting into trucking and playing sports. I always felt like if I wasn't going to get somewhere with football, I would, get involved with the family business because I had a passion for it.
So I was looking at your profile, and it looks like you're a football coach as well.
Yeah, I coached, and I haven't been able to do it ever since before COVID, and a lot of sports shut down, and just busy with life and having kids. But yeah, coaching football, it's a great way. I had coaches that coached me on their own time. They gave up their free time to come out and support me, and I always felt like it was my duty to pay that back to other kids in the next generation. And you see that a lot in the sports culture. It's something that doesn't get talked about. But in sports, you learn a lot of lifetime lessons, stuff that really sticks with you from certain coaches, certain camps, certain just things that you watch in general.
I think, the biggest thing I appreciate about sports, and I have a MMA background, I've done fighting, and I think the biggest thing, I learned is just, confidence, and the thing about fighting, and I imagine you can understand this, is that when you learn more from losing. You learn more from losing. Did you feel like the same thing?
Absolutely, 100%. And honestly, I'll go back to that 2022 by-election. I ran in for the Conservative Party when I first got involved, taking that loss, expecting it to be, everyone said you're only going to get 100 votes or maybe 2%. We ended up exceeding, but I still took that as a huge loss. I was like, I'm never going to let this happen again. So you work hard, you learn things, you figure out the systems. That's what's been taught to me through sports and through other ways, and that's what I kind of took to this.
For a lot of people, they don't understand that your foray into politics was around 2021, 2022. How did you transitioned from aggregate truck driving, construction, and how did you get into the sphere? Because it's not a sphere you just jump into. What brought you this way?
Well, there's a lot of different things. A friend of mine that I ran into just off social media, Aaron Gunn, and became having a good friendship with him. We talked about a lot of issues. I know you've talked to him, and we just talked
Yeah, he's a
about
great guy.
certain things that just weren't being talked about, and we felt there needs to be someone that talks about this. That was one avenue, and then just personal life. Like after my dad passed, when I had just gotten married, 5 months later he passes away. A lot more things fall on your plate, and I had to start dealing with a lot of other companies, like contracts and everything. Then you realize all the regulatory burden that's in the way, the taxes and everything, and I just kind of found myself dealing with government officials, carbon tax, like one after another, policies, shutting out a lot of the pipeline jobs that we had tried to put in bids for, but then by the time the job comes around, you're like, hey, that bid was 2 years ago. There's been a 2-year delay. I have inflation for parts, fuel, everything else. And, it just created a havoc of just being able to run your business. And I just was vocal. I've always been vocal. I've always been like, hey, talking to other truckers, these policies don't help us. I understand a lot of us are in unions and other things, but I'm telling you, this is a road that it's going to lead to a disaster. We're shutting out the non-union sector with certain collective bargaining agreements and with community benefits agreement that's going on. So I just kind of felt myself right in there in the thick of it, and I felt like I had to do something. This is a company, my dad came here as an immigrant, started and put his blood and sweat and tears, gave his life for it to provide a better living for myself and my kids even. And I felt like I had to do something. I have to stand up and I have to raised my voice, and looked around, a lot of people of color weren't speaking up, and I was like, I need to do something, because it seems like every time people bring up these policies, there's the race card gets thrown and there are other things, and I just felt like I could get out there, voice my opinion, and hopefully be heard.
I can respect that. I really can, because I think a lot of us up until 2020, 2021, a lot of us were like asleep. Like we kind of expected government to kind of be the shepherds, like they were going to act in good faith. And I think a lot of us experienced, especially during COVID, what the government was actually doing. Like I think a lot of us experienced, like I was, you're isolated, you're looking at these absurd policies that were being implemented. We're going to open malls, but we're going to shut down gyms. Like, really? The Harvard studies are coming out saying that the aggregate people that work out are less susceptible to serious infection. And yet here we are in BC, like where we're shutting down, exercise, like where we're actually causing people like more harm. And then we have
the liquor stores were open earlier. It made no sense.
Yeah, you're telling me that I can wear a mask. First off, I have to give you a passport to get into a restaurant. And then once I'm in that restaurant, I can wear a mask, sit down, take that mask off, but as soon as I go to the washroom, I have to put that mask on. Like, it was absurd. It was like having literally a peeing section in a swimming pool. Like, the policies were absurd. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but like that's when I started tweeting about the government overreach. And and I think the biggest thing, like with Canadians, is like especially now, is that we don't have a voice, especially in the media. It's uncomfortable because the narrative that's being pushed out by the mainstream CTV, CBC, Global News is not the narrative that me and you grew up with. It's like you'll read it and you're like, really? Like that's your take? Because that's not the take I'm getting at home. And one thing I do want to ask you is, like, you hear a lot of people, especially people like the leader of the federal Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre. He's talking about red tape. What kind of red tape was like? And you mentioned it a little bit. You touched on it, like saying that you would put out a bid for a contract. It would take so long for them to kind of like go around, circle that contract, and by the time you got that contract, you're telling me that the price of that contract now costs more. Like, can you talk a little bit more about like the red tape that you experienced, like as a business owner?
Well, there's various levels, especially in construction industry. There's a lot of red tape just with the projects, getting them going through environmental and other studies and other things. there's various levels. Just getting permits on time, making sure the city sets the permits, but the funding doesn't come in on time, so they can't roll out the job unless if they can pay the contractors. There's a lot of things at play, and especially with the housing aspect, this is something a little bit off, but like I feel the housing here, we're always rushing to get permits and building right here in the Lower Mainland, but there's other areas in BC where there's faster ways and we can build housing in other areas that speeds up. Maybe we need to go take a look at those regions and see what they're doing. Like you have Edison Motors went to Donald, BC just to make sure they can build a business and a warehouse, a test track and everything else, because there's very low building regulations on the municipal end. They just go by the BC building code. I think we need to look at other regions, how they're doing it, and seeing some of that policy and seeing if that can work here in the Lower Mainland. Because like there's a lot of housing projects that are getting shelved right now because of these issues, because of all the permitting delays. And one thing that I've kind of noticed was the NDP, when Ravi Kahlon was the housing minister, he said he was going to create 40 positions to speed up the permitting process. And now what I feel that's done is created another layer of bureaucracy, another layer that you have to go through in order to do it. I've yet to see the reports to say, hey, this has actually sped up the process. Seems to be government policies are created to try and speed things up, but they don't ever pan out. You're just adding another layer. There needs to be a reduce to the bloat. You need to find a better way of delegation to make these policies and permits flow faster.
I seen a recent tweet from John Rustad, the BC Conservative leader, saying that he would basically dissolve the Metro Vancouver, and I'm kind of pulling this quote off my head, and just because you mentioned it, I kind of heard him tweet he was going to break up, the Metro Vancouver Board of Directors. Do you know
what's
what I'm
going
talking
on? When
about?
Metro Van has morphed into, it's supposed to be to provide you with the basics, your recycling, your utilities, your upkeep, and everything like that. It's morphed into something massive. And right now we're putting so much money, there's so much cost in it. Are we getting the services that we were putting the money in? We are not. So they do need to look at it. They need to get back to the basics in certain ways and just take care of the everyday essentials people need. Their garbage picked up on time, making sure their water's working, all the other recycling, the roads are paved, everything is good. There's not flooding streets in the winters. Those are the issues that we really need to get back to. We can't be bringing in added stuff and getting into the whole, you see a lot of municipalities doing more than what they're supposed to be doing, pushing social ideologies and making environmental, like paper bags charges. Brad West talks about this. Why do we have paper bag charges? Why do we have cup charges? These are the things that just added burden to people's lives and cost.
Well, and I don't disagree with you. I think that you touched on a few things that I didn't even realize. And more importantly, when we talk about building code, like Canada has like a national standard for building code. Like you have an electrical code, you have a plumbing code, but then here in regional Vancouver, you can go to Surrey and they have they're
completely different.
Completely, they have a bunch of bylaws that you have to follow. Then you have to go to Langley. They have a bunch of bylaws that you have to cover. And then you come to Vancouver, and there's like a bunch of new bylaws. Like, why do we have so much? And it's like this regulatory red tape that is so unnecessary. And when you're talking about, like the city council, like doing too much. Like here in Vancouver, I was surprised because I was looking at my building minutes, and we have to submit a report to the city of Vancouver on our building's carbon footprint. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, what? Why are we submitting a carbon footprint to the city of Vancouver as a like, and then that's coming down to like the people that are just living in the buildings. Now you're making like the people that are living in your city submit a report about like what we're doing for carbon and why. Like it makes no sense, especially when and you're talking about the carbon tax and the the absurdity of it. And what I find the most absurd thing about the carbon tax is it's such a feel-good tax, is that we tax everything here in Canada with a carbon tax. Now we have the industrial carbon tax, the fuel efficiency carbon tax, or fuel clean efficiency, excuse me, Carmen, I apologize. It's the fuel efficiency carbon tax. And what I have a problem with this is that all of our imports coming from other countries, i.e. China, aren't taxed a cent on all of their carbon footprint. Are you telling me that China is not using coal power to make their ships in BC ferries? You're telling me that they're not burning trees and throwing this, like, it's so absurd to me that we're handicapping our own industries to follow this ideology. And even more to your point about cities doing more than what they're required. It's like I remember the last city council of Vancouver was sending letters, having their lawyers draft letters to Ottawa about they need to do more about climate change. I'm like, dude, you need to deal with their roads.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous.
Upgrade your underground utilities so you can actually densify without affecting other residential communities around you. But you nailed it there. With a lot of the carbon tax and everything else, what's under the pressure the most right now? The business community, the small businesses. They can't even compete on a global level with a fair playing field. You have every other country that doesn't have a carbon tax. Now they're manufacturing, they're putting out these goods and products, and they don't have to compete against that. So where do you think people are going to go to buy these products? To foreign countries who can produce them for a cheaper cost. We've kneecapped all our businesses here from competing on the global market. You look at what's happening with the BC ferries, you look at C-SPAN, everyone's like, why don't these companies bid on these projects? Why are they going to put hundreds of thousands of dollars into a bidding process that they know is rigged against them? There is no industrial carbon tax in China and all the other regions. And we're talking about emissions. We want to reduce them. We're giving it to one of the biggest polluters, and where there's no labor standards, no emission standards. And now we're telling British Columbians, especially the youth, you cost too much. It's too expensive to pay you, so we're just going to take these jobs and get all our goods and services from foreign countries, import their goods and services. And what does that tell youth here, especially for people my age and younger? There is no future here for you. There's no future for your kids to have a good paying job so they can have a family and buy a home and have a life here in BC. This is the message that this government is sending by offshoring all our jobs and kneecapping our own businesses from competing on a global level. You don't think manufacturing companies are hit by this or other industries aren't hit by this? They're affected from actually competing in a free market. We have kneecapped ourselves while other countries haven't.
It's not worse than kneecapping. It's such a hollow virtue signal because we're not doing anything to fix the climate because it's almost a shell game. Like like the shells go around, and what really ticks me off is when we're gonna touch on this BC ferry things, and for everyone that's not aware of what's going, here's the controversy. BC Ferries sent a $1 billion taxpayer-backed contract to Beijing for ferries, and it was backed by Ottawa's infrastructure bank, while our own shipyards and workers were sidelined. Premier Ebby and Mark Carney, they campaigned on Canada first, Ebby BC first, but when it mattered, both waved the white flag. Harman, let me ask you a question, and I really want to kind of break through the noise here because let's just say tomorrow that BC Conservatives won a majority. Would you rip that contract up?
100%. Our leader Johns even said he would rip up that contract. We should not be funding a PLA-linked government that has undermined our values in our country, meddled in our elections, held the Michaels hostage. This is insane to me that we're going to give money to them. And you saw the new reports today how they're building out a ferry fleet to possibly invade Taiwan. Do we want to send our dollars to a communist government that is looking to take over other countries? I don't think that's a smart thing to do. I'd rather keep those dollars here local when we need them the most. We have so much youth and people in BC just moving out of this province. Let's create some of those jobs here. There's a tax revenue of income tax that it comes out of those jobs. There's old age pension. There's a lot of avenues that those jobs help fund. They create an economic revenue to our province and country. Let's keep those dollars circulating within Canada and British Columbia.
Well, let's be clear. Like the reason China is able to fund this military, like the reason China is so competitive on like their ferry front is because, again, they subsidize their shipyard building, but their shipyards are always building ships. And what ships are we talking about? Military vessels. So technically, we're bringing in our tax dollars to fund that same shipyard, which is, again, building military vessels, which is encroaching on not only Taiwan, but also like our waters. We're, the Arctic sovereignty, everyone's talking about Arctic sovereignty, but guess who's also looking at Arctic sovereignty? China. And here we are as we're backing that same industry. And, and more importantly, let's talk about what $1 million buys here in Canada. What are the industries that are most affected by Trump tariffs? Well, steel. He's one of the first things he's gone after. What are ships made out of? Steel. I always find it very frustrating when I hear people like Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney saying, well, Canada didn't have any shipyards that put out tenders for bids. Well, you know what? You have a couple $1 billion to waste on, on ArriveCan. You look at the Green Slush Fund, like the taxpayer money that got wasted there. You really think you couldn't find a couple $1 million to help, build the infrastructure for a shipyard like this? And what really frustrates me as a taxpayer, as a citizen, is that you had all these meetings prior to the election. Mark Carney, I'm meeting with all the premiers. I'm having discussions with all the premiers right now. You think David Eby could sit down with Mark Carney and say, "Hey, look, Mark, we got a couple ships that we're going to need built here in a couple months. What do you think we can make happen?" You're telling me neither of those guys could had the vision for that conversation, especially David Eby. I think it's a crime that he allowed that to happen. I'm sorry, I don't mean to get so passionate about it.
No. This is honestly, you're 100% right on this, because we hear it all the time. And especially a lot of the politicians, they say spend your dollars where you want it to count, where it goes towards good things, environmental things, things with good value. And now here we have the same government saying that we're going to give her money, spend it on a country that undermines her values, meddles in her elections, and, isn't really friendly to a lot of our other allies. What are we doing? Why are we sending our dollars there? The same politicians that gaslight us every time, hey, you shouldn't spend your dollars here, they're oil and gas and whatever else it is. These are the same ones now sending the money to a place where they have human slavery.
We lost my screen here. Stand by there, Harman. I was in Uber. I was getting a ride back to my truck, and I was talking to this Uber driver. He was especially chatty, and typically I just put on my headphones and I go, but he wanted to talk, and he was talking about how he's immigrated from this country. He's been here for about 15 months. He's on a 3-year work visa. He spends $13,000 to get his class 1, so not a significant portion of change he gets. Mm-hmm. He spends a little bit of money, his own money, to get here. He tells me about how the immigration process worked. There's no Canadian embassy in Iran, so he had actually crossed borders to get his biometrics. That says the tenacity of what he had to go with to get his temporary visa. And then so he comes to this country, and then he gets his $13,000 class 1. He tells me, I'm like, well, so how much are you making? He's like, well, typically someone starting wage for a class 1 driver is $27 an hour. And then I'm like, you're making that much? He's like, no, I'm making about $22 an hour. And he's like, what's worse is I make $19 an hour after tax. I'm like, well, that's not a lot to live off. And I'm like, well, why are you like, why can't you make more? And he's like, well, the companies, they know about my situation. They understand that I don't I don't have enough. There's more people where I came from, so they can make, they can afford to pay me less. And so then I'm like, okay, but he's like, well, it's okay. I get to do Uber after that. So now he finishes an 8-hour shift driving truck, and then on top of that, he gets to do another 8 hours working Uber. And he was really appreciative of Uber. He said to me, he's like, oh, I love Uber. I'm thankful that I'm able to make this extra income. But then that tells you how bad his living conditions were before he came to Canada. But on top of that, I was like, well, what's your living situation at home? And he's like, well, I live in a basement suite. And I'm like, well, that's great. How big is your basement suite? He's like, it's one room. And I kind of shook my head. I'm like, one room? You got a kitchen? He's like, no, I got a hot plate. I'm like, you have no kitchen. I'm like, how much are they charging you? He was like $1,000 a month. I'm like, so what bothers me about this story more than anything is that we have this temporary worker or the temporary foreign worker program, and it almost seems very exploitative. And I know you've been kind of a big critic about this, the temporary worker program. What are your thoughts on it? As a business owner, as someone,
I feel there is, for farming, agriculture, and certain other industries, we could have used it as something like, I've kept hearing from, the provincial government, the federal government, we're going to bring in workers to build our homes. Well, they brought in a bunch of people to do construction, but what type of construction? Did you bring in machine operators? Did you bring in people to work in concrete, asphalt, other various areas, carpentry? Or what sector of it did you bring them in? Or did we just bring in a bunch of general folks and we're going to figure it out and train them here and everything else? Well, why not train locals? Why not have programs for them? It was a short-sighted thing, and all it's done is created ways for some people to abuse the program. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of hospitality, a lot of restaurant industries. Some of them, it's being abused. But there's businesses that use it for good, valid reasons. There was a time years and years ago where they needed to have extra help. They needed to have extra help. They needed to lure in workers. There wasn't enough. But now we're not in that same situation. So they do need to scale it back, revisit it, and get rid of it in a lot of ways. I think it does need to be scrapped for a lot of ways. I don't think bringing in temporary foreign workers for trucking is a solution because the safety aspect's been gone. We've seen horrendous accidents that are coming up. Just today, there was an accident in Abbotsford, Chilliwack area, and there was a drunk driver involved. There should be some data that tells us who are these drivers that are they on the foreign temporary permits? Are they, veteran drivers that have been here for a while? We need some of this data so we can create policies that help.
So, I think you mentioned you hit a big point was that these are good paying jobs, and right now in BC we have a problem with youth leaving our province, and that there's no hope in this province for young people. And it almost seems like this government's really abandoned the next generation. It's almost looked like that they've kind of said, well, it's okay. We'll worry about the jobs creation here in Canada. The big companies, but people in Canada, not Canada, but especially in BC, I was looking at the jobs numbers. There's about 12% unemployment for youth. It's like you can't find a job here, and you can't have a society without people that are able to build families, and people can't build families here in BC because it is so expensive. You wonder why people are not having families. Well, having a kid is a incredible undertaking. I'm sure you understand that. And I think the biggest thing I have with the problem is that we have a government that doesn't understand that. Here in BC, the average home is over $1 million. If you want to go to Chilliwack, maybe it's $700,000. But same point in time, the most economic opportunity here is in the Lower Mainland. The opportunity gets less and less and less the farther you go out. And the problem I'm having with this government is that they want to import more people. You look at the job, or not the job numbers, but you look at why the housing shelter costs are going up is because, well, Bank of Canada, and they've been saying this for year after year, is that you have a supply and demand problem. well, you look what happened in the last 2 years, 2023, 2024. Well, the Liberal government imported about 2 million more people. Pretty sure it's 2 million more people. And I honestly, I'm kind of thankful that the rest of the country is actually catching up to BC, because we've had this problem since, I think, the Olympics, is that housing prices have become detached from income. I think it was back in the Olympics that we first started seeing that. And then finally the rest of the country is now experiencing that. But I think that's more of a condemnation on the provincial government. And like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what are the solutions?
You look at it right now, like I've said it just a little bit ago here, we're failing on the jobs front. Or where is our jobs minister of British Columbia in economic development? Where is Ravi Kahlon fighting for these jobs? Not once did he say a peep about the BC Ferries jobs lost to China. That is a huge red flag. These people that have been elected to help British Columbians are silent. Then on the temporary foreign workers program, I know EB came out about it. Where was the echo from Ravi Kahlon? Absolutely silent. We need people in these portfolios to represent British Columbians for their best interests, not foreign places and foreign actors. We need to focus on British Columbians, and I'm not seeing that here. And we need to start talking about this.
Why do you think they don't have the political courage to cancel that contract? Like, what's the net negative of saying, hey, like, we need to build that in BC? Like, why are we seeing the provincial government and the federal government say no? Like, the federal government has a vested interest to build Canada first. They can cancel that contract. It's from the infrastructure bank. Why is Ebi so hesitant not to get involved in that contract? Like, what in that file specifically do they see to not get involved? I don't understand it. Like, can you give me some insight?
That is what has transpired. It has been, now it's pretty public knowledge through what happened in the Transport Committee with Dan Albus, Aaron Gunn were involved with that. It's came out. They knew all along. None of them wanted to say anything. They all just pointed the finger at each other, and here we are, we're losing a massive contract and jobs, and we're shipping them overseas once again. This is a repetitive nature. We need some of these politicians to wake up, especially the ones in minister roles, to represent the best interest of British Columbians. We can't keep going down the same path and thinking we're going to get everything done overseas for cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, while at the same time we're saying buy Canadian, build Canadian. It is so hypocritical. We need our politicians to have some political backbone and represent Canadians and British Columbians first. And you are not seeing that from the federal Liberals or the provincial NDP here under David Eby. And a lot of their ministers, like I said, Ravi Kahlon has been absolutely silent. His mandate is to create jobs, protect jobs right here in BC, and he has completely failed. Jobs are constantly shipped overseas, while I see no action taken right here in BC. Mining sector is stagnant. Forestry sector is being depleted. What about those jobs? I'd like to see someone that's going to raise the awareness about these good paying jobs that can help keep British Columbians in BC, afford a life, have a family, own a home, just like a lot of others before them had the opportunity to do so.
I'm glad you brought up, Dan Albus. I'm glad you brought up Aaron Gunn about that Trans Committee, because last week they had the BC and Marine Workers Union. Marty Warren, the national director, he echoed a lot of what you're saying. He said,
McNeely,
quote unquote, we need clear, enforceable, buy Canadian policy. Public dollars must support Canadian jobs and communities. And here we are, as a perfect example, is that, well, they're not able to enforce that. There's no clear policy, so it gets exported to China. And my experience, Harman, is that when large groups of people, they get together, they default to incompetence. And the worst part about it is, when I see that's extra trooper, the public sector, is that we just default to incompetence. And nobody is, like, for the last 10 years, we've had nobody accountable. Why do you think that is? Like, why are Canadians so hesitant to hold their public officials like MLAs, ministers to like more account? Like, why is that?
Because a lot of their jobs now, you've seen the cancel culture get in here. People talk about certain political beliefs, and next thing you know, they're getting fired and exiled from their industries. It's been happening rampant, and that's the main reason why I got involved. I'm sick of the cancel culture. It is absolutely sickening to see out here. People evolve in life, people change in life. And I just think that we're going down a terrible path with this. We need to start speaking up and representing British Columbians, Canadians, and not being so silent on some of these issues like you've raised right here.
Right. No, and I don't disagree with that. I think that it takes. I think the biggest thing I have is and I take this away from a lot of like what you first said. Like when I look at your your profile and your Twitter account, is that you need to always be doing the right thing. You always like it's just not it's not a part-time thing. You need to always be doing the right thing. You need to be principled, and I just think that we're seeing less and less principle. The mainstream media lets them get away with it. Back in Chrétien, what took them out? Well, it was because the public office holders had a scandal with Air Canada, and that brought down the government. And now here we have government after government that is unprincipled, that have scandals up the wazoo that would normally bury. If this was a conservative government, let's be clear. If John Rossett had done that, he would have been out. They would have the Vancouver province would have been after him. CTV, CBC, they would have said it was a betrayal. Here we have David Eby and the federal government, Mark Carney, and they're like, "Oh, this is okay. It's not a big deal. It's fine." There's no shit bills to be tenured, and it is so frustrating to watch because it is such a dog and pony show. I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about. I kind of want to switch gears here a little bit because one thing I want to talk to you about is a little bit about SOGI and the program of SOGI. And it's a big thing in BC because, as you know, SOGI is not a curriculum. It is a tool. And I think, it was introduced in 2016. And I looking at it, it kind of looks how it's very sneaky how it was introduced. And when I look at the program, and then it became especially prevalent when I had kids. I want to know, when I grew up, when I was 5, and they started teaching about the dinosaurs and evolution. Well, Johnny and Kelly got pulled out of class. They were never here when they were teaching about the dinosaurs. And you kind of learned later that, well, their parents were religious and they were creationists, and they brought them out of school. I respect it. Maybe I don't agree with it, but at the same point in time, you got to respect that their parents were actually involved enough to pull those kids out of school. And here we have a system where we have an ideology, inclusivity. We're going to teach that gender is fluid, and not everyone subscribes to that belief. Let's be clear on that. Mm-hmm. It's not proven. It's not science, and we now have a curriculum that is baked into the education system here in BC. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I believe parents deserve to know what their kids are taught, and I think some of these ideologies we need to remove from the classroom. We need to get back to the basics. We need to help our kids get ready for the next level of education and whatever career path they want to choose. And, what people do in their private life, that's, their decision. And there's a time where that happens. But with young kids, I have young kids. My son loves dinosaurs. He still does. And, if I had asked him when he was 4 or 5 years old, he would say he's T-Rex. So what was I to do? Should I transition him into a dinosaur? Should I make his arms like a T-Rex? Should he go to school and bite a kid and I say, well, that's just what dinosaurs do? No. I let him be playful. He plays around with my daughter, brother and sister running around like little dinos chasing each other. It's a playful. They're going through a portion. And I just think that making some of these decisions at such a young age it's detrimental. And we need to actually help support some of the kids. We understand some kids are going to might be gay, lesbian, or trans, or whatever. And it's their right to. But I don't think going in schools and pushing curriculums on kids is going to have any kind of resolution in this. Maybe we need to work on something that has, I've talked to friends that were lesbian or gay and in that community, and later on they said, hey, you know what, Harman, we didn't know what to do in dating and other things. We wish we had more help there. It led us down other paths, right? Like when I was in school, they would put on a video saying, hey, this is someone that has aggressive behavior. Look out for this. We should be teaching safety aspects, how they can safely live their lives in whatever they want to be, whatever their private life they choose, their sexual identity. Make it safer for them. And I'll be honest, if you're someone that looks at someone that's gay, lesbian, or trans and makes derogatory comments for no reason, maybe you're just a terrible human being. Maybe have a conversation with someone. Like people have different ways of life. I don't think we should go in a point where we make fun of others and degrade them. That is just not good for society. But we need to come to understanding is how we can move forward. And there is no talks regarding that. Like if, with Soji, I do think it's not a program that should be in schools. But let's have this discussion. Let's figure out something we can move forward with that others can agree. We have to have a sense of compromisation, right? But there seems to be no one with the political will to actually be like, you know what? We need to look at this. We need to address it. Maybe we need to make some changes. We shouldn't have graphic books and descripting sexual acts given to young kids under a certain age.
Right, like what they're doing in Alberta.
If I had brought any kind of book like that to school, any kind of magazine with sexual graphic, I would have been kicked out of school. There would have been a call to my parents saying, hey, Harman came into school with this book. This is completely unacceptable.
Right. Especially, I mean, I looked at those books that
yeah, that's
some
what
of the books
me. I have a nephew.
Yeah.
He actually showed me. At first, I was like, I haven't seen anything. Then when you have nephews and nieces and you see some of this, then it did actually, verify to me that this is going on and this needs to be addressed. And we had Bruce Banman actually ask a question in the legislature about this. Right? So we know these things are going on. Let's have the discussion. Let's stop punting it down the road and polarizing even more. Let's work on something here. And I don't see that from this government. They will rather cancel you for even wanting to talk about this rather than talk about it, which actually helps everyone.
I think the most safest thing, going back to what you're talking about, I mean, I'm not even opposed to the curriculum. If it's a class, I'm not opposed to it. But I would as the parent, to have some say in what my kid's learning, what the education system is. I want some say. I don't think that it is fair to have the state say, no, we're teaching this. You have no say. Mm-hmm. This is the problem. I was talking to one of my buddies about this, and I was saying, well, what happens next? What if we start looking at the Bible and we start taking the Bible out? I understand that, we have a separation between church and state. However, let's just say we start using the Bible as a tool for teaching. Do you think that the leftists wouldn't have a problem with that? Absolutely. Let's just say, or maybe we use the Quran. Maybe we start teaching, Sharia law, but it's not the law. We're not going to teach the school. We're going to use it as a tool to educate your children. But it's not church and state anymore, Harman, because it's a tool. And I find that rationale is very, very upsetting to me. And what I would like to see, and I think this is the easiest middle ground for every politician, is to say, look, we're not going to bake this into the entire school system. We'll make it a course, and if you want to opt out, that's your right as a parent. And I don't see why that is so controversial.
Well, that's like in elementary. I remember later years in grade 6, 7, they would have sex education. You'd go back, tell your parents, hey, we're learning about this, and that's how they would go, you wouldn't. So there needs to be something like that where parents do have input. And one thing, too, we need to start teaching a lot of kids is financial literacy. That's important. Get them a step ahead. Let's teach them about these things because that's the real world. Let's get kids ready for the real world. And now, you see this notion, everything's just rainbows and fairy tales. You're going to just get a good job. You're going to have to compete in the real world. I'll tell you, especially being in trucking, man, what a volatile industry. You had to work hard every day. You wanted to be that person that's up first thing in the morning, the last one going to bed, making sure all your ducks in a row for every job site, everyone's being there on time. and they have all the information they need, so you're not playing tag throughout the day. You have to work hard in life. It's just how it is.
I think touching on what you said is being hungry for it, and it goes back to sports is learning how to fail. And another thing that's upsetting to me as a parent is we don't even have grades anymore in school. So everyone gets a participation ribbon, but what happens is when you get into the workforce, there is no participation ribbon. You are being graded, because if you don't do your job, if you don't perform, you get fired, or you don't know how to learn from your mistakes. People are afraid to actually try because they're afraid to fail, and the worst part is they don't know how to fail. Failing, if I could learn, the best lesson I could teach my kid is that failing is one of the best things you could do, because it teaches you adversity, and it teaches you such character, because it's not about failing, it's not about winning, it's about what you learn from that. What failure, and I think Tony Robbins said this, failure is just a result. If you don't like the result, you change the formula. And I think that we're not teaching that in school right now. And I think it's such a travesty for this generation, because these kids don't know how to deal with adversity. They don't know how to, learn from the mistakes. They don't know how to get the next stage, because they've been taught everyone is equal. And unfortunately, that's just not the case, and I kind of want to touch a little bit more. And I know we're running low on time, but I do have one more question about, the BC Conservative Party. If you look online, the narrative is some people are saying that they're politically homeless. The NDP is too far left. The Green is, they're a ship without a paddle. And one thing that I hear more and more is that the BC Conservative Party is dysfunctional. And when we look at the BC Conservative Party, what happened in the last election it was a Cinderella story as far as I'm concerned. You had John Rustad. He started with Bruce Banman. They had that. You brought it up. They had that question period where Bruce Banman challenged them on Soji, and they had all of this momentum. They basically dismantled the BC United Party. Good, but when I look at the playing field, it almost seems like a party that got way too big too fast. They were making up things during the election. BC United collapsed, and they brought in a bunch of the BC United members, and then what you had happen is that you had people like Dallas Brody, and let's be clear, Harman, I would have fired her too, because I think she was fired after the podcast where she was criticizing her fellow MLAs, and what choice did John have? But my question to you is what do you say to those people that say that the party is dysfunctional?
Well, I don't think... See, that's another thing we talked about, the media. Yeah. What are they going to hammer away? They're always going to pick on the conservative side. Are they talking once about the dysfunctionalness in the NDP? How a lot of people don't have confidence in David Eby. There's a lot of people who are already organizing. We see this. But one thing I'll tell you is, I talked to a bunch of our caucus members. We're out there. We're focusing not on the drama. Honestly, as a British Columbian watching this and listening right now, do you want your local represented MLA focusing on drama that's going on, or issues in your riding, or your MLA's critic portfolio? That's where all my effort has gone, is focusing on the people of Langley Abbotsford who elected me, and the transport critic role that affects all British Columbians. You can see I am not getting caught up in any of this drama. I realize a lot of things are being said, but when I talk to most caucus members, we're focused on one thing, and that is defeating the NDP. There's so many things happening on the other side that will never get the media light. We know this as conservatives. We realize it, but you can go out there and see. We have several members out there working hard. Macklin McCall. You have Claire Rattay working hard out in Skeena. She's always bringing up really hard-hitting points. We have a lot of people that are focused on representing British Columbians. And I hear all this stuff about the party growing too fast. I will say, we grew really fast. But we also are holding the NDP to account. When have you seen these many stories out in the news every single week while it was getting Charlie Pollock's medication, funded?
That was important. You made that. Your party made that happen.
We have made huge things. You look at what happened with the ferries. Kootenay Bay and Balfour, the stay order in Hairpin Proctor, then the stay order in Glade. We were able to realize there was a huge issue. There was a strike already here. I realized that. We realized someone was tweeting that was actually looking over the case, and we got him removed and stay orders put in these communities. And you know what? These aren't communities that are necessarily our communities. They're run by NDP MLAs. Brittany Anderson, she was nowhere to be seen during that ferry stuff.
Right.
We have time and time after again, there's been issues where we have been in the forefront. And look at the off season. People thought we were going to get out of the ledge. There was going to be no political news. I think this has been one of the most politically active off sessions. And it's
right.
because
No, you're right.
we have
Absolutely.
been working hard. And that's something that's getting lost out there. The BC Conservative Caucus is working very hard. You're going to hear this stuff about drama, but we have a good group of MLAs put their head down, work for British Columbians, and we're going to work for the people that elected us.
You know what, Harman? I respect that. Yeah. I think you know, like what I will say now is I can say that I see what you guys are doing, and I totally agree with you. When I was watching the BC United, or formerly the BC Liberals, you know, it was almost like it was almost the same brand of the NDP, and that was my biggest frustration. Me and you talked before about the podcast about what was so what brought me to Aaron Gunn and why I like watching him is because, you know, when we watched the BC Liberals, it was almost like, well, we have a better carbon tax. Harman, I appreciate you.
We have a better version of this, better version of that, but at the end of the day, it doesn't help British Columbians.
Harman, I'm going to have to let you go. I really do appreciate you spending some time with me. You know, everyone, we've talked about the abuse of Canada's immigration system, $1 billion ferry contract shipped off to Beijing, and a reality that young people are leaving BC in record numbers because they no longer see a future here. And here's the point. None of this is inevitable. These aren't national disasters. They are political choices made by the leaders in Victoria and Ottawa who talk about Canada first, BC first, but fold when matters. Harman Bhangu, thank you for joining us and sharing your perspective. Where can everyone find you?
I'm at Harman Bhangu BC on most platforms, on X, Facebook, Harman Bhangu, Instagram, Harman Bhangu BC. Fairly active. You can get out there and check it out and engage. Shoot me a message. You want me to cover a thing? I'm all ears. I'm always taking in information. I run my own socials.
Thank you so much for spending your last hour with me, Harman. I'm Dan Knight, and this is The Opposition. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next fight. Thanks, Harman.
See ya.
If you're still here, good. It means you're paying attention. It means you're not asleep. You're not gaslit. You haven't been bought by the media spin or the liberal fairy tale that everything is fine while the country burns. I'm Dan Knight, and this is The Opposition. They have the consultants, they have the lobbyists, they have the legacy press, CBC, CTV, Global, spoon-feeding you government-approved talking points like it's North Korea, but with a better wardrobe. But we have each other. We've got the truth, we've got the grit, and we have the absolute audacity to stand up and say, no more. No more fake budgets, no more climate virtue signaling while our economy crumbles. No more surrendering your sovereignty to Brussels, Beijing, or Beltway elites. You can find me on Substack or Twitter, Dan Knight MMA, or on Instagram, and wherever honest Canadians are still allowed to speak freely. If you like what you heard, like it, share it, send it to someone who still thinks for themselves. We are building something here, not just commentary, but a coalition, a resistance to the rot, a community that refuses to bow, bend, or beg for permission. They have the legacy media, but we have you. And if we stick together, they don't stand a chance. Let's make it count. I'll see you on the next episode of The Opposition.